This is The Merge, the podcast that highlights the transdisciplinary nature of real-world problems. I'm Alan Shhadi, Dean of Engineering and Architecture at the American University of Beirut, and today is December 9, 2024. We're fortunate to have with us today Dr. Nassim Taleb of the Department of Industrial Engineering and Management at AUB. Dr. Taleb's essays and scientific publications on the nature and consequences of randomness, probability, and fragility in the real world are among the most widely read and discussed works of the 21st century. He is erudite, clear-minded, and irreverent. I always leave conversations with Nassim amazed at his insights about how often we misunderstand the architecture of the world we make and inhabit. Nassim, welcome to The Merge. Let's start with some basic concepts. What do you mean by randomness and uncertainty?
So there have been a lot of theological discussions on randomness, whether something is truly random or whether it's perceived as such because you don't understand the logic of the sequence. And to me, it's a full problem. It's maybe something that you should discuss on weekends in theological seminaries, but not in the real world. Your computer, if you generate a random sequence on your computer, there's nothing random about it. It is deterministic. It's just that you don't know the algorithm, and the thing is designed to deliver some class of distribution. Okay, so the example I typically give that, and that because I had a lot of problem with the black swan. People tell me, "Is it a black swan?" I'll tell them it's epistemic. To me, randomness is epistemic. So the example is that of a pregnant woman walking down the street. For you and I, unless you happen to be
Have some inside information.
Exactly, privy to some information. It's a random number generator, all right? It's 50-50, approximately 50-50. For her doctor, it's 100%, or if it's a male, you can see it's 100%. If it's a female, it's like 95%. So it's not random. Likewise, when people ask me about a black swan, define the black swan. Is this a black swan or not? I tell them it depends on what you know. For the butcher, it's not going to be a black swan. For the turkey, it is. For those involved in hijacking the planes for September 11, there's nothing uncertain about the event, or there's very little uncertainty about the event. But for the rest of us, it was black swan.
So the core thing here that you're pointing to is that randomness is from the perspective of the observer.
The way I work with it is epistemic. And there have been a lot of philosophical discussions on randomness that I skip. I mean, I sometimes was involved. I mean, at some point, like everyone, you start reading books, philosophical aspects of things. You go deeper in philosophy, and then you realize that it was really functionally, it was it was called a blind alley. It was like there's no point going in that direction, at least in my own work, maybe for someone else, because then you go back to theology, definition of God.
Okay.
And the definition of God is for whom nothing is random.
Understood.
You see?
If we go then to the next step would be a probability distribution.
Yes. Okay.
What is a probability distribution?
No, probability distribution is a very Platonic object.
Okay.
That allows you to summarize a bunch of things. But we can work with it mathematically because there are some properties that are sometimes universal. Like, for example, if you have sequences of independent random events, the sum
such as a coin toss
converge to Gaussian, to normal distribution, for example. So for me, the classes of probability distribution rather than specific probability distribution. And there's a classification, right, from at the top, there's something called forget about it, because distribution, you'll never know the attributes from observation of random data, to others that are easier to track. And effectively, there are three classes. At the top, there's something we call the power law class, where things are determined by the extremes. And at the bottom, things are determined by the middle.
And ingrained
So-
in so many of our minds through school and schooling, we think
Exactly.
of the latter. We think of the bell curve,
No,
the
because you
Gaussian
can easily work
distribution.
with the first one that is determined by the center of the distribution. To give you an example, nothing can really impact the average when you have a lot of observation. So let's take your annual consumption. You're in Beirut, probably one of the best cities to eat. 365 days a year. Not a single day can change your annual consumption.
Our annual consumption.
By more than 3 divided by 365, by 1%.
Mm-hmm.
So not a single day.
So people got up and ate a lot on Christmas or what have you.
Yeah,
it's not going to really affect the mean.
Exactly. It doesn't have a cumulative effect. It's very small. So the extreme is interesting, but doesn't play a huge role.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take Extremistan, it's the exact opposite. Everything's determined by the extreme. So
can you give an example?
Take the stock market. 0.2% of companies represent more than half the capitalization. 0.2%. The arts, maybe 0.2% of authors have more than half the books
mm-hmm.
sold or mentioned. Academic citations, same effect. The bulk of, most academics are hardly ever cited, and a few just get all the credit.
Mm-hmm.
You have 1 million scientific papers every year. Very few have any impact.
So what are the consequences of being in a place like Extremistan?
No, so Extremistan, you have a lot of unfairness.
Mm-hmm.
Luck plays a much bigger role. skills play a role, okay, but it's sort of like I give the difference. In Extremistan, you need hard work will get you a nice car, a nice house, maybe a nice watch, and for you, a nice bicycle.
Yeah, for you too.
Yeah. So, but to have a private jet, a private island, all that, you need the same amount of hard work plus a lot of luck. So, because there's some outcomes that can be much more explained by variance than by what we call the drift. So these are the two classes, but as I said, there's a third class in the middle.
Okay.
So that class in the middle is what I call the sub-exponential class. It's more complicated, but you and I were having a discussion about life expectancy. So let me define the three classes in terms of life expectancy. In Mediocristan, let's take aging, all right?
Okay.
As you get older, your life expectancy shortens. So conditional on being 0, your life expectancy is 80 years. But if you're 80 years old, your life expectancy is another 12.
Mm-hmm.
At 100, maybe 2.5 years. And at 120, a few minutes, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is the first class. In Extremistan, for processes that are from Extremistan, the more something ages, the longer the life expectancy. Mm-hmm. Typically, so, or same thing, you can apply it to sales. The average sales of books of more than 1,000 copies are 2,000 copies. The average age of books that sold more than 1 million copies is 2 million copies. Mm-hmm. And the average life of something that survives 100 years
will be another
200 more years.
200
so
more years.
200 years or 100 more years,
Mm-hmm.
or however it's
Mm-hmm.
200 in total. So whereas in age, the average age of the person older than 80 is 92,
Mm-hmm.
you see?
Mm-hmm.
So, but the class in the middle, you can observe it in many things. I'm sort of having a discussion about life expectancy. The reason we die is a combination of accident and aging senescence. So the accident part should never be neglected. So that part, the accident part, it has a simple property. Let's say the life expectancy as a crocodile is 40 years. Okay. You observe a crocodile at birth, 40 years. Age 10, 40 more years. Age 40, 40 more years.
Because so it's an accident-driven.
It's accident-driven or memoryless.
Mm-hmm.
You see, it's like saying you just observed a natural calamity, not a hurricane because these are periodic, but the probability of having another one hasn't changed. You see, sometimes has increased. So sort of your light bulb, if it has 5,000 hours, and you bought it 5,000 hours ago, it still has 5,000 hours. So that's in the middle. That's interesting for processes. That middle thing, interesting for many things, but not for risk management in the sense of the demarcation between extreme stand and mediocre stand, the intermediate class. And you rarely observe it outside of hazard ratio and stuff like that. It's a distribution of accidents. We call the memoryless distribution.
So how does that, you often talk about the consequences of fat tails when we're talking about probability distributions. First of all, what is a fat-tailed distribution?
So fat-tailed is extreme stand.
Okay.
It's a distribution where you're going to have most of the impact coming from the smallest number of observations. So, as I was saying, 0.2% of companies have more than half the capitalization historically. All right. It can even be even worse. You're taken cumulatively. Can even be worse in some industries, such as technology.
So just to make this concrete, if one of those 0.2% goes under or blows up or whatever,
it changes. It
changes everything in the market.
Yes, very few events in history has had. The small number of events have driven most of the consequences of historical dynamics. All right, take Christianity, take Islam, take very few events. But you can look at it also in terms of natural catastrophes, like very few earthquakes represent the bulk of the impact of earthquakes. But also, we worked, my colleagues and I, on modeling pandemics and wars. And these have the fattest tail. The smallest number of wars has killed the largest amount of people. A few wars have killed the bulk of the people who ever died in war. And, the two of them we know, and there have been a few in the past in China. And the same thing for pandemics. A very small number of pandemics have killed, or germs have killed the bulk. You participate to the bulk. And these properties are, the interesting thing about the extremist stand is that these properties, also apply to a lot of things in geometry, like fractal geometry, because there's self-similarity between the events. So in other words, to tell you why does it relate to scaling, these are what we call scalable power laws. The ratio of millionaires to half millionaires is the same as the ratio of centimillionaires to those who have 50 million. It's the same, or for book sales, it's the same. The ratio is sort of scale invariant, almost. And you don't observe that in mediocre stand. And another property, for example, here you can see the demarcation. The best example is when I give that the height, the cumulative height. Let's say I have a really tail event. I sample two people randomly, and I have a total height of 4.1 meters. What's the most likely distribution? Well, it's not going to be 10 centimeters, 4 meters. Right. It's going to be 205, 205. But if you sample wealth, and I have two people, and they happen to have $100 million in total net worth, what's the most likely distribution? It's not 50-50. It's close to 100 million and zero. Like 100 million minus a few dollars, zero, plus a few dollars. So you see how you have a clear demarcation between these classes of phenomena. And the problem is, for pandemics, they were using mediocre stand properties applied to extreme stand.
Let's drill into that for a second. Yes. So how did looking at COVID as mediocre stand impact
a lot of people are aware that, like under fat-tailed distributions, your metrics aren't quite adequate, but they have no idea how inadequate they are, and they have no idea about how to correct for that. To give you an idea, I mean, if you like, the Gaussian distribution is based on mean and variance, and these are uninformative. Okay, I remember I had a fight with a fellow whom I met when he was humble. He's probably the most published person in medicine. His name is Ioannidis. So we had a debate, fight, intellectual fight, and he was saying, okay, no, let's learn to predict the number of deaths. And the problem is that you can't really rely on prediction because your prediction error is monstrous because sampling error is very high. The law of large number either doesn't work at all or works very slowly. And also because you have 95% or to 99.9% of the observation falling below the mean. So being a good predictor, okay, doesn't capture the properties. And then also the other thing is that you have to react very quickly in the presence of these risks from Extremistan, Fattailed risks. You have to react very quickly, figure out how to kill it in the egg by preventing spreading. And he wanted us to wait to see the impact.
I see.
Where I say, okay, we have now about 50 years of mathematical frameworks, okay, that we got to use. It's not because you're ignorant of these frameworks that we should wait and see. It's because you have published in medicine. So there was problems with these guys. Luckily, we got published in Nature Physics, so we started having scientists who were concerned with AIDS. Everybody was concerned with COVID. Everybody was concerned with COVID. So our message went through that effectively they were using epidemiology based on not just Gaussian the metrics related to the Gaussian distribution, but also drawing consequences. So my book, the statistical consequences of Fattailed, is the one I'm probably the most proud of, is about how to work with these metrics.
So how did you recommend working with these?
Yeah, so you have to, okay, the thing about these Fattailed things, they spread fast. And the reason, you got to look at what makes something from Mediocristan versus Extremistan. Entropy, you have limitation. The Gaussian distribution comes from maximizing entropy under something that has finite energy. You see? So when there's no energy, okay, or a different type of constraint, you get different distribution. That's one. And also the multiplicative effect. So to explain why the planet today, for example, we got to think of, you have spreading of cultural phenomena. The Beatles, it wouldn't have happened in the 14th century. And the same thing with COVID. The example I give about the spread of diseases is if you follow the Silk Road, and then the disease hitting Istanbul would take 2 or 3 centuries in case it's very, very contagious to reach areas in Northern Europe that were sort of isolated. That's what happened with the Black Plague. It reached Europe it took a while to reach Europe. It was slow. And there's some parts of Europe that were reached 3 centuries later. And the Americas, an infinite centuries later, never reached the Americas. The Americas was not in contact with the old world. So this is where you have to cut the transmission.
So today, just to make that point clear, today would take a few hours to travel the Silk Road.
Exactly. Okay. So you have to figure out that's the difference, is that don't lock people in, don't worry about it, use the old method. And actually the Ottomans were pretty sophisticated. They had lazarettos, which is like quarantine. We had quarantina here. That was the aim of quarantina, to cut the spread.
Absolutely.
So you work on cutting the spread first. And of course, there's an asymmetry. In the presence of doubts, you overreact quickly. Say panic early, don't panic late. A bunch of rules that we've learned from the ancients. You see, because these may have irreversible effects and you want to react early. So there are ways to react. The other one, you don't produce forecasts, because forecasts, and I said that there's 2 mistakes. One is those who made the forecasts, and the other one, those who critique their forecast. Both are wrong.
So when we're talking about forecasts here, you're talking about the forecast of mortality or number of people.
Mortality by COVID.
Right.
Plus, there's also another thing, and I explained it in the lecture at AUB, which was not present in epidemiology, that the way scaling works for Extremistan is weird. So the probability of you and I of dying of a car accident, okay, of any two people dying or any 100 people dying of a car accident is much lower than the probability of dying from COVID. Let's say that we're in 2019, it held true. But the probability of 1,000 people dying of COVID in the same town is higher than the probability of 1,000 people dying of a car accident in the same town.
Understood.
So when you start working with extreme, so with the mentality, you start with the extremes. And you tell yourself, if I were to go to Mars, spend 6 months, and I had the news that 100 million people died in the United States, was it more likely to come from? It's pandemic.
Absolutely.
So whereas the risk of dying of a pandemic locally for any individual is lower than the risk of dying of a car accident.
In a car accident.
But you're not going to have 100 million people dying of a car accident.
Understood.
Or drowning in their bathtub. So all these arguments offered by epidemiologists were not mathematically rigorous, and then we realized there's not a lot of rigor in medicine. So which is why instead of focusing on anti-fragility, and because anti-fragility is beautifully self-sustaining as a research field, I started focusing on medical statistics, where people were making large-scale decisions without understanding the local properties. It took 13 months for the United States to shut down the border. I mean, shut down the border, you don't have to close the border, you just have to test. It's like a quarantine, 13 months. We're testing in Beirut, you see.
Because we were stuck in another paradigm. I mean, we're stuck in a paradigm of mediocrity and things being predictable and
exactly. I mean, they're using tools of show me your forecast, and your forecast error is high. Forecast error is in Extremistan has a different property.
Absolutely.
So I explained that mathematically. Luckily, we got published in good journals. My colleagues and I were complaining about wars. Right? For example, the inter-arrival time between large wars is 250 years.
Okay.
Okay, very large wars. Medium large wars is more than 100 years. So you can't say, hey, we have 75 years without a war. Without a big war, the world is a safe place. You can't. Which is why you have to worry about nuclear war or worry something, because it's a property of history and it hasn't changed. Okay, education didn't change it. The creation of the UN didn't change it. Nothing, right? Or the League of Nations initially, nothing changed. It's the same thing in finance. Most losses come from very few events. And for a trader, like you can't lose half your weight in a day, but you can use 100% of your money in a minute. And it happens. It happens practically every day.
You've talked about that in the context quite a bit of perception of skill versus luck. And you've used also the example of Russian roulette and survivorship bias. I think all of these concepts kind of tie together in the sense that, yes, if you make $1 million every time you pull the trigger, you're going to find some people who become millionaires or even billionaires, but you're going to have a much larger cemetery.
Yes.
Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, so in other words, that's the standard thing. That's not really my own...
Sure.
Except that it was part of my treatment of randomness, and not my own discovery, is that you have survivorship bias. In other words, you have a selection bias caused by survival of some entities versus others. And I noticed early on that people were always, and that's the theme of Fooled by Randomness, always under the impression that traders were rich. And all I knew was bankrupt traders, okay, because I was from the inside. So whereas the dentists, someone who graduates from dental school is practically impossible for that person, unless they really have
unfortunate or
unfortunate. It's impossible for that person, unless there's malpractice, of course, to become a cab driver. You see, whereas I know so many traders in Chicago who are cab drivers. I say you see them on the floor, and then 3 weeks later they're driving you to work. Okay, so that you can generalize to probability distribution, to a lot of things, to a lot of wars, the unseen. So I generalize from it, and this is where it gets more interesting, how we tend to scorn the abstract, even when it has clear statistical power. Okay.
Okay.
And that's where we were fooled by randomness. I generalized it beyond the survivorship bias, but survivorship bias is very big in a lot of things. It's like we had the impression that if you invested in stock market, that you would have already done well. But someone in 1900 invested in stock market for the same reasoning would have invested in the Turkish stock market and the Russian stock market and the French stock market, except for Anglo-Saxon countries. Okay. The rest went bust. It was completely bust.
But we tend to see the success stories, so
Exactly.
it leaves an
Yes.
image in people's minds that this is how you become successful.
Exactly, it's a sampling bias problem.
You highlighted maybe two persons in fooled by randomness. I think John, the trader John, and Nero. As kind of examples of these. Can you just briefly tell us?
Nero Tulip was a more introspective fellow.
Yeah.
And John was one of those people you run into on Wall Street, and they're riding high, but next thing they're going to disappear.
Whereas Nero
is more solid, more robust, because he's aware of the ruin problems.
Okay.
And you can generalize ruin problems to a lot of things. When we went after GMOs, because you have ruin problems. You don't exit ruin problems. To go back to the Russian roulette, okay, you can't say 80% of doctors agree that the Russian roulette is safe, or the Russian roulette is 80% is one of the six is 80% safe. You can't say that.
Right.
Is 1/6 safe? All right, or 5/6 safe. So you can't say that because the consequences are tough. So very often when we talk about statistical evidence, we don't realize it's insufficient for risk management. You need the probability of ruin, which is a completely different dimension, to be very low. And that's sort of embedded in my work. To summarize, my work, I have the inserto. 5 books so far, maybe 6 soon. I don't know. But for now, it's 5 books.
Okay.
Around the theme of uncertainty. And the overall theme is we don't quite understand how the world works, but that's not a problem.
So why isn't it a problem?
Because of a symmetry of decision. If this water I know this water came from AUV, so it's got to be very safe. But if I don't know, if I have uncertainty about the source of this water, my decision is very simple. What should I do?
Not drink it.
Not drink it. So if you're uncertain about the effect of fossil fuels on the climate, don't use it. If people say, "Oh, we're uncertain about the effect, let's use it," all right? So you see, there is a asymmetry. Now that asymmetry is the engine behind fragility, anti-fragility, all of that. So embedding asymmetry in systems. So and people don't realize the value, why small probability is very important. That if you're a pilot and you say this plane is 9% safe, which is what we use standards and evidence for many domains, but you'd have no pilot would survive 10 years of flying.
Right.
The probability is 1 in 10 to the 30 maybe for flights surviving 10 years.
If it was 99% safe.
99% safe. Okay, it has to be. So you have to have much higher standards when you have ruin things without recovery.
So you're looking at the down, like it's not enough to look at the upside. You have to be considering in all of your strategy what the downside is.
If the entire absence of recovery. This is what's called putting the dynamics in the game.
Okay.
But strangely, a lot of academic research falls for these errors. That's why I wrote Skin in the Game, because they don't trade. Like right now, there's a new Treasury Secretary of the United States. And what's her name before him? She's clueless, right, about risks and all of that. Because
she wasn't in the real world. She wasn't trading.
In the world. For them, it's equations, and something can be wrong and stay forever because nobody wrote about it, because they wrote about the same thing. And Scott or whatever says, we have to worry about ruin problems. And of course, because he was a trader, he understands ruin. He understands the dynamics.
That so let's go into Skin in the Game.
Yeah.
So the way I read it, at least in large part, it's an essay among other things, about ethics and how one should conduct themselves. Ethics and evolution.
And evolution.
Okay.
And why is it your role? So let me explain skin in the game.
Yeah.
That a system, well, first of all, the ethical part is that if you're causing injury, you should be exposed to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you can't make a decision on Syria sitting in an air-conditioned office in a Pentagon. You see, because in the past, that's not how it happened. Warmongers were first line in battle. Napoleon was overly exposed. Although he wasn't the most ethical general, he fled twice,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So
a general in say ancient times would be in the battle.
2/3 of Roman
himself.
Emperor died of violent death.
Mm-hmm.
2/3.
Mm-hmm.
So he has skin in the game.
And how do you contrast that to today? I mean,
okay, so today we lost it about 40, 50 years ago, because before that, Kennedy was in war and he was injured. George Bush was prisoner of war, the father, not
mm-hmm.
the son.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing, so there's an ethical dimension, but there's an evolutionary dimension. Let me explain the evolutionary dimension first. When you drive on a highway, even in Lebanon, okay, you don't have crazy people who, because you can easily kill, if you drive in the opposite direction, you can easily kill 30, 40 people.
Mm-hmm.
But why doesn't it happen? Because people who have these attributes are already dead.
They're already filtered out.
They're filtered out. So skin in the game is a filter in the system, you see. So if you can cause harm, okay, and receive harm, you're not going to do it for long, because it will filter you out of the system.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
So this is why we didn't have a lot of wars, because warmongers were filtered out of the system.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't survive as they do in Washington today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see? So that's one dimension. But there are other things. There are epistemological dimensions, that you can't really capture a process intellectually without having contact with reality via skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And to give you an idea of how which systems have skin in the game, which systems don't,
mm-hmm.
I give the best example of that of restaurants. Okay, the survival of restaurants. The survival of a restaurant is completely determined by non-visible or things that are not visible to the industry. Okay?
Such as?
I mean, for example, the restaurant that people like to go to in Atlanta serves horrible Italian food. Nobody's Italian there except the daughter of the owner has a Italian grandmother or something like that.
Okay.
So it's in the basement in Atlanta. It's musty. Food is bad, but people go there maybe because they like one another or whatever it is. Okay, so there was in New York, a friend of mine who invested in a restaurant, lost a lot of money, told me that there was an annual gala dinner where, because there are prizes throughout the year given by journalists and other restaurant owners. There's a gala dinner where they present prizes for these restaurants who won all these
best desserts,
whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. And usually half the restaurants are bankrupt by then.
By the time they receive the award.
Exactly, because the way it works is you're not tested by some committee. This is not the Soviet Union. You're tested by
the customers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and the customers may go to the restaurant for different reasons than ones top-down that journalists can imagine. Okay, so this is where. So this is an example of lack of skin in the game. You have to have contact with reality. So you tend to see a lot of incompetence among economists.
Mm-hmm.
There's no contact with reality. So he's a great economist. Why? Well, because he got the Nobel. He gave them Nobel. This is why we have all these guys go bankrupt, actually, after the Nobel. Some committee, all right? Mm-hmm. It's like with the restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a plumber, it's impossible to be incompetent and survive.
Absolutely.
Okay, dentist, same thing. Same thing for dentist. It's the same. You have to. Your skin are visible, so you can, when I say macro BS, but not micro BS.
Got it.
So skin in the game is when a person has some kind of contact with reality, which entails professional survival or other things, and then not judge. I mean, a plumber doesn't get his bonus
by a committee of plumbers.
Committee of plumbers, exactly.
Yeah.
Or by journalists.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no tenure committee for the plumber.
Exactly.
So, in that context, you've also mentioned soul in the game. You've talked about soul in the game. Sure.
Okay. Because some disciplines have skin in the game, medicine, because we're interested in survival of people.
Absolutely.
Whereas other disciplines, economics, there's no skin in the game for the discipline in general, because the effects are not visible.
I like to think of engineering as one of those disciplines that has some skin in the game.
I mean, it depends on which engineering. Some civil engineering,
we're sitting here.
Yeah, we're sitting here. But some kind of branches of engineering. It's not immune, of course, but of course, overall engineering is respected. Whatever your grandmother respects has skin in the game.
Interesting heuristic.
Yeah, this is a good heuristic. Your grandmother wanted you to be a doctor or an engineer.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
What if she wanted you to be a lawyer?
Well, in the United States, lawyers are considered are more respected in countries where they're also more hated, like the United States, but where you have more consumer protection. So I'd say in the United States, being a lawyer is something your grandmother would want you to do, but because of the structure here, lawyers are less play a smaller role in the functioning of society.
Absolutely, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, you want to live in a place where people hate lawyers. Then you feel
because they're effective in that sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you about soul in the game.
Soul in the game was fascinating. I could see. Could you first of all talk about what is soul in the game?
Martyrs. I mean, we saw we had the war now with, and then martyrdom is a soul in the game. You go one step beyond. You're doing things not for financial success. So the first thing people don't understand about skin in the game, it's not about incentive. It's about alignment of disincentives. But in some cases, you have a lot more harm. You take a lot more harm than needed for the sake of for a cause.
Of doing something right.
Exactly. So whether you love, I have soul in the game in my books. So it's beyond, I mean, I don't take it casually, but also some people may have soul in the game in whatever they're producing, beyond the cosmetic, beyond the perception, beyond anything, just like it feels right for them. So a good artist must have soul in the game. But it generalizes a lot of things.
Someone who would obsess about what they're doing beyond where it's even valued by anyone else.
I gave
it's
the
intrinsic.
example of Steve Jobs, the Homsi.
Yeah.
Right. And Steve Jobs, you're not going to see what's inside.
Right.
But he was so compulsive that he wanted it to the aesthetics of what's inside that you're never going to open in this and your computer to match his artistic sensitivities. So that's all in the game. See, whereas if you look at buildings, the way they're built in the West in New York, they look great from the outside, and then you take the service elevator or you take the stairs, and you realize the shabbiest construction for the stairs because nobody's going to see it.
Absolutely.
Whereas he would have had something else. So soul in the game is one step beyond.
I had a group of students right after graduation. They went back to, literally the same night, they went back to the lab to continue working on the project just because they wanted to see how it will work out in the end. No credit left. They already got their degree.
That's soul in the game.
That's soul in the game.
Soul in the game. I mean, the Chinese, when they work, they have soul in the game. They seem to derive satisfaction. They would say they don't separate. They separate the labors from the fruit of the labor. It's the labor. That's the fruit. So it's all reward. So that's soul in the game.
Now, and the lack of skin in the game, as you pointed out, is kind of it's an attribute of the modern world we're living in, and a source of a lot of pain in the end of the day.
Yes, I mean, it was necessary in the beginning to have a less skin in the game to encourage the formation of corporations. But even Adam Smith warned about it because you end up having, when you have your own company, you have soul in the game. But when you have a corporation, you end up having people who cosmetically They're just good at getting jobs as CEOs.
Mm-hmm.
And the CEO is not the founder. Is not the CEO. Is someone who's just playing the game.
You've talked about empty suits.
Empty suits, and the more a person looks like a CEO, the more likely he or she would be an empty suit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I often try to invoke the notion of teamwork. Okay, and you've talked about being a wolf versus being a dog in some context. And I was trying to think about how soul in the game and teamwork align or don't align along the constructs that you've presented in the past. I often tell my team, I'd like, whenever I leave academia, I want to just go work in an F1 team, and I don't mind sweeping the floor because
F1, what's an F1?
Formula One.
Formula One. Oh, okay.
Okay. Because the way the team works, there's so much accountability. There's so high expectations. Everyone lets everyone know when they didn't do their job well, and everyone knows if they did their job well or not. And it functions as an orchestra, from the race strategist in the moment to monitoring the tire temperatures and what the competitors are doing, to the engineers who are thinking about the fluid dynamics around the car, to the race car driver themselves, and all of it has to work perfectly.
Yeah.
And you can see it even in the pit crew. They're glued. Their eyes are glued to the TV, watching their race or what's happening with him, and they're getting upset. They're getting happy every moment by moment. And when he comes in, they're just on fire, ready to go. They got to get that tire changed in under 3 seconds, and the whole thing works. What is it about? So sometimes teams, even corporations, this is in the end of the day, this is owned by some rich person, one of these teams or a corporation, and yet it reflects the ethos of having soul in the game.
I didn't think of the problem. It takes me a while to think of problems, all right? But I've looked at the scaling notion.
Okay.
Why is it that some people are more effective, some societies composed of idiots can have a greatly functioning system, and how societies composed of geniuses have
terrible systems.
Terrible, because how things scale, and the intelligence of a group isn't the same as intelligence of one individual.
Mm-hmm.
Intelligence being defined as some kind of effectiveness, and no matter how you define intelligence. So, in the East, we're Mediterranean societies, good city-states, or villages, and things function better, at the individual level. You see, houses are clean from the inside, but the collective doesn't work very well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Europe, it's a reverse. So we tend to be here overeducated, but it doesn't work well. Think of south of Milan, you don't have large corporations.
Mm-hmm.
In Italy. See, all the corporations are in the belt
and the
between
north.
Milan and that corridor,
Mm-hmm.
Lombardia and Piedmont and Veneto. And then as you go south, you have fewer becomes artisan. But so they're made to be artisans, right? Small workshop, whereas large corporation require a different mentality, you see. So maybe there's this effect. I don't know about teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
The end is important. In other words, more is different.
Mm-hmm.
So some things, the Swiss work better at teams, but individually, I don't know. But they have a lot of skill. They were the least educated country in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, but I have to think of the thing about how there's a communal skill in the game and teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
But I spoke about risk sharing, and that was important from our practices. Both Phoenician and the Arab one, is that when you had a caravan and for the Arabs and the theft of at the tail end is prone to a lot of
being held up,
exactly.
robbers.
At the end, someone's going to come and take permission that they all share the cost.
I see.
And but the Greek is called Rhodian law. Is based on Phoenician practice that if a ship sinks, it's not just the owner of merchandise who loses property, but there's something called appropriation. the owner of the ship, the buyer, the seller, and whoever has financial investment in it, they all share the cost.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing, distribution was communal. In other words, you communally bear the cost of a loss. Some of it still exists in maritime law,
Mm-hmm.
because the law is fuzzy, but capitalism is trying to do away with it.
Trying to do away with that distribution of...
Capitalism is about neatly defined self-standing entities that are even separate from the owner,
Mm-hmm.
because you can go bankrupt without having to go to debtor jail,
Mm-hmm.
which is good in a way, but it has drawbacks that you gotta be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
On Wall Street, in 2008, 2007, traders went bankrupt, kept their bonuses.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
there is a halfway between, there's something called the clawback, and actually we have more and more clawbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, hedge funds don't have that problem,
Mm-hmm.
because the owner of the hedge fund must be invested in her or his funds. So therefore, if they lose money, it's a higher proportion of their net worth than any of the investors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they have skin in the game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But a corporate, all these heroes of corporation, what's his name? This guy, what's his name? Jack Welch? He was a fraud.
Yeah.
I was saying that when he was alive, so this is why I can continue. It's not like, but he was a fraud. But it took a long time for him to figure out he was a fraud.
Why was he a fraud?
He would manufacture cosmetically good earnings. You collect companies, all right? You buy companies. Some of them make money, some of them don't. The one that make money because of the accounting valuation, he would sell them for a profit, and then he would keep the rest. So it's an adverse selection problem.
Right. So
in the portfolio, and then sure enough, it showed up a few years later, and the companies went down by like more than 90%. But he collected bonuses and became a billionaire based on some kind of package. So you have the upside without the downside. You play that game.
Got it.
Or what I call the Bob Rubin trade. Robert Rubin was vice chairman of Citibank, part of the system. He was Treasury Secretary, former partner at Goldman Sachs. He made $200 million in bonuses, or $120 million from Citibank. For trades, I call them selling tail events. And then, of course, they're bound to go bust. He's paid an annual bonus for an event that happened every 10 years. That's another mismatch between Mediocristan and Extremistan that was not understood during COVID. So something blows up every 10 years, but he paid an annual bonus, all right? And then when Citibank blew up,
he left with a bonus.
He kept his bonus. All he had to do is say, well, it was a black swan after some kind of stubborn author, right? So,
as you're well aware, we're coming out of a period when there was an intense conflict, escalation in Lebanon with our neighbors to the south. We don't know where this is going to lead in the long run, but we're currently in a ceasefire. You've been active commenting on the situation here as well as in Palestine and Gaza, and have put forward some interesting views on this topic. I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about your work and its relation to what's happening and what's been happening lately. So how about we jump in with some of the myths that you've busted in a way is in relation to who belongs where.
Yeah, who belongs where. Okay. The first thing that in my new book, I talk about time, and it's very similar to the survivorship bias. We tend to flow backwards modern conceptions. Okay, and when I wrote about the Levant, we say when we talk about Christianity or Judaism, we use modern definitions, post-rabbinical Judaism, and flow them back to what they were. So this is an era of anachronism, not realizing the differentiation between Christianity and Judaism was different, and not realizing that Judaism was, at a time, a religion that was very proselytic. People wanted you to worship their God, okay? That was the one they worshipped in the Temple of Jerusalem. So I realized that very quickly that Shlomo Sand was correct by looking at genetics. Now, let me tell you what I did. Again, skin in the game. I don't like to talk publicly about something unless I have done work professionally in it in a peer-reviewed journal. And I decided on that policy after the Black Swan.
Okay.
Why? Because people were putting me in categories. When the Black Swan was out, there were other authors. I mean, these come and go, but you don't realize they didn't have the survival, you know. But at the time, people thought they were hot. And I realized they're clueless about their subject. Okay, I mean, one famous person now is Harari, for example. But he has no idea what he's talking about. No idea. Okay. So I realized that I want someone, if I'm going to read someone, that person must be also published in a peer review framework.
Okay.
Why? Not because the peer review is a filter, but it's necessary but not sufficient. Why? Because I want to make sure that there is a rigor of thought, that there is evidence and stuff like that. So it so happened that so I could talk about the Palestinian issue and the genetics because I published now 4 papers in genetics. Okay, and I got to genetics as a diversion from entropy, accidentally.
Okay.
In a probabilistic approach, and I've been working now for 4 years on a paper, but in the meanwhile we published much genetics. So I could talk about genetics. Then I realized that I started talking on Twitter about the genetics relation. I looked at the Palestinians and the Samaritans. They're the descendants of ancient, whatever you want to call them, ancient people of that land. You want to call them ancient Hebrews? Yes. Maybe they're called Hebrews, but we're not that sure. Okay.
Okay.
Then it triggered some kind of investigation on my part where I felt uneasy. We're using supposedly ancient terms to define stuff that were invented later on. Then I read Shlomo Sand, and Shlomo Sand was criticized because they say, oh, it's not rigorous. In fact, it is rigorous. That he said that the bulk of Jews from Yemen are converts under the Himyarites. The bulk of Jews from Morocco are converts. And of course, there's a Khazar theory, which may not be correct, but we know that a lot of the Ashkenaz come from north of the Black Sea. I mean, they're there. So then it hit me that that law of return is nonsense, because when we read about ancient Hebrews, there's the people who are there now.
The people
Palestinians.
they already returned. They never left.
No, they never left, and they're the Palestinians, right? And if they're stubborn, because if ancient Hebrews were stubborn, these guys are stubborn. Okay, they're people of the land. And then, of course, and the other thing is that nobody came to what they call land of milk and honey. They're already there. Okay, maybe a few preachers came from Mesopotamia, like Abraham. Maybe a few preachers, or whatever, but they were there. People invent stories about their own background. So, and I realized from another piece of work that's in the Skin in the Game, in the Inserto, is on minority rule. That there's a big mistake people make about mixing cultures and population. Populations follow the majority rule. Genetics follow the majority rule. Whereas languages, religions, and cultures follow the majority rule. A minority
the
rule.
minority
Let me
rule.
explain.
Yes,
rule.
please. Let's go into that.
We're in Beirut at AUB. What is the language used?
Arabic, English?
No. Just let's say there's a German person sitting here.
Oh, we're going to speak English.
15 people who, instead of speaking Arabic, Levantine Arabic, you switch because one person doesn't understand it. Okay. So,
absolutely.
So languages travel faster, very fast, and culture travel fast. Whereas in genetics, you've got to mix people and wait for generations, and it's not the same effect. It's slow. So you realize people are under the impression that Palestinians came with the Arab invasion. Just like a lot of people in Lebanon think that they came from Arabia. Nobody came from, the language came. Like the Maronite think that they, or their enemies, someone claimed that they came from Mesopotamia. No, their religion came from there. Okay, their heresy of someone came from there, and the theology came from there, but not the people.
And how do we know that? Or
from
how do
genetics.
Okay.
From genetics.
Can you say a little bit more about?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you can look at the genetic distance. You can look at few metrics, and it's very dicey because, of course, you can't publish freely in that subject without being attacked left and right by someone who's going to come up with some weird argument. But the evidence is clear that the Christian Palestinians are the closest to what we have ancient DNA. They discover bodies on the ground. The closest thing are Christian Palestinian, not because of, like, I guess someone like you, all right? So because they, there's something about, I call it the Brownian Bridge thing, that the most likely place someone's going to be after 2,000 years is where the person was 2,000 years ago. There's some kind of inertia. Peasants, first of all, don't travel, and the Judeans were peasants. You have to distinguish between Jewish and Judean, because in Hebrew and Arabic, it's the same word. The province of Judea, of Jerusalem, as its big town. And these people were peasants. So it looks like if the Jewish religion spread, it's because of communities of Canaanites around the Mediterranean, because Phoenicians traveled a lot, and they had a network. And sure enough, someone else took the network, and people probably didn't even know that they had different religion. These things are built later on and flown back retrospectively, you see, based on modern concept of what religion became, not realizing religions evolved. So this is what I have to say about the area. Maybe controversial, whatever it is, just, science is science. So the Palestinians are really suffering because it's their land. And the other guys are definitely, they had a religion, but not the Jews. So if they claim, they should claim that belonging to that religion gives you a claim to the land. I'm sure maybe the Palestinians would convert, okay? But that's not the idea that they're coming back has absolutely no merit.
Has no ground in physical reality.
No, that they're coming back. The idea of return.
Understood.
There's no return.
Understood.
The law of return. There's no return.
So you're not necessarily making the argument. I just want to be clear. You're not necessarily making the argument that genetics should be a basis for settling historical claims.
But they're making.
But you're in a way countering with evidence that this
that
is
your
not
claims
a true,
of ancestry doesn't hold.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
The idea of, in my new work, I talk about using genetic arguments. It's so bogus because we've been mixing. Most of what we have is a Eurasian population, particularly Western Eurasia, a mix of 4 population groups that kept mixing over time. You see, so what are you going to stop the mixing? You see,
right.
It's like, hey, we found the right combination. People are mixing. You see, now they're probably mixing faster than before. But there's something quite important about that minority rule, is that you notice that places like Turkey, the first thing that hit me when I went to Turkey, so I looked at Turks as a child, they don't look Mongolian, they look like Syrians and Greeks. I said, okay, maybe they changed religion and language. Well, that's what happened. So the Turks are largely Greeks, Armenians, and Kurds that are converted, with small minorities, 7%, 5% of people from Central Asia, okay, or maybe higher. But still, there's a mixture. And then the other thing would go even beyond. When you look at Syrians and Greeks, you say, oh, yeah, Semites, these are Indo-European. Oh, that's bogus. It's because languages change, but the genes. So there's the same genes. J2A is dominant in northern Syria and Greece, and among the Greek islands. So distinction Phoenician Greek was only linguistic.
So again, in relation to the minority rule and majority rule, what you're saying is the genetics move slowly. That's a majority rule problem.
Yeah.
And language, culture, religion can move quickly and be a minority rule.
Exactly. The only few cases where genetics moved fast in places that were like Americas or what's now Russia, you know, Siberia, is because it was invaded late. Nobody wants to go there. Would you want to go there if you could live by the Mediterranean? But the Mediterranean had no mixing of populations, strangely, since the Bronze Age collapse. Very little, because think about it, even today, when the Lebanese want to emigrate, where do they go? They go to the Americas or Australia. Do they go to Sicily?
No, they don't.
No, and the Sicilian, when they emigrate, where do they go? Come to Lebanon? No, they went to the Americas. Some went to Egypt, okay, but at some point there was some kind of business there. But typically, so you go far. So the Mediterranean hasn't had too much movement of population over time.
And that's something that's reflected in your publications, in your at least in Turkey and Anatolia, you discussed this exact problem.
No, we did actually a paper on Kura.
On Kura also, okay.
And we took the three communities of Kura. The Kura, the Greek Orthodox.
For those who don't know, Kura is in the north of Lebanon.
Northern Lebanon. So the Kura is, well, actually it's a Greek name, it means villages. Greek Orthodox, we have next to it the Sunni Dalniye, and we have the Maronites from Zgharta. They're a little bit of, maybe we have had some Maronites that had some Armenian influence. Remarkably, the Sunnis are very similar to the Greek Orthodox, but we're all very similar, right? But they're all closer to ancient Greeks than people from mainland Greece today.
I see.
Because we have ancient Greek DNA. We're closer. We're actually the closest to ancient Greek DNA.
And the Greeks today, where are they?
The Greeks today are mixtures of Balkan stuff from the north.
Okay.
Because, you know, it's like Egypt has had some people coming because it was, I mean, over time, a little bit of migration changes the scenery. Greece has had some from the north, and Lebanon, remarkably, has been left alone for a long time.
Let's double click for a second on how do you figure that out? So you take DNA from people living today, and you compare that to what?
So other areas and ancient DNA.
And ancient DNA.
Ancient DNA.
Okay.
And then you could try to figure out the path that it took to get here. Okay. It's probabilistic. This is how a good use of probability. This is why I got interested in genetics coming from probability.
So interesting. In this last part, I just want to bring you back. You're sitting here at the American University of Beirut today. Of course, you're from Lebanon, from Ammon, in the north of the country. What brought you back? Like, why are you spending so much of your effort here?
You know, the thing is, I don't really care about my own. I mean, I don't want. Life has been good to me financially and academically and all standpoints. So I don't.
So we're not paying you millions of dollars to
exactly. I don't need. No. In other words, I don't need to. I have nothing. I mean, I'm not interested in my own career. I was actually not very interested in my own career, and these are the times where you do the best.
Yeah.
Just like by now, by criticizing the Israeli, the whole structure, okay, by criticizing Israel, you know, you open yourself up to a lot of professional harm. I couldn't care less. Okay, it's not like I'm taking a lot of risk. I couldn't care less, right? So it's natural. So anyway, so what do I care about? Okay. And promoting my book, I couldn't care less. Honestly, by now, I couldn't. I mean, I like to produce them. I like them to be beautiful. I don't want them to circulate. Actually, sometimes I get irritated when I see them in airports. You see, I want to. So anyway, so what I'm interested is in. It's like a grandfather interested in you know, the new generation, but except that you generalize beyond your own family. So I'm interested in the welfare of the Levant in general, all right? And how it can help, right? That's it. So I think that helps. And then also there's another thing is I like it here. The food, the people, you know, I like it. So I want to help as much as I can. You know, the Levant, and that's one way. Maybe you guys don't need me, but I'll try to do something. Maybe that could be useful. But also, I want to. There's another thing that I truly believe in the decline of the West, not because of anything except what I call saturation. Because after a while, the system becomes overloaded and start having some properties like on the S curve, they got too much of everything. So the incentive is not there compared to the East. So I want to bring back Lebanese to come back here, right? If they can. So that's sort of like what my real agenda is, to make people study here. The U.S. Now still has good scholarship, but first of all, it's thanks to foreigners, because most professors. I was in an engineering school in the U.S. and we didn't have any domestic
talent.
Zero, nor domestic students.
Yeah,
so
especially in the STEM disciplines.
It is, and here, it's the first place here where I don't see, that effect, okay, non-locals. But anyway, but what's the problem of the U.S.? The problem of the U.S. is something went wrong in 3 fields. The first one is healthcare. It costs tons of money to get nothing. You're subsidizing some kind of research or something. The second one is education. You pay tons of money and you get better education elsewhere. I mean, my education in Beirut was better than what I got, what my children got in the U.S. And the third one is the military. And like China produces drones for 7% of what it costs the U.S. So you realize that the West is, there's something about the West, okay, that is, that's, they have a good life. They have nice biking paths for you and I who like cycling, but you can't really see a lot of future there. So the future is closer to the east. And traditionally it was here. And the center of gravity of the world moved from China, India to Europe only after the Industrial Revolution, after the discovery of the Americas and the Industrial Revolution. So remember that the Roman Empire had to move east because that's where the money was. So I think that there's a headwind. It's not like I'm not preaching in the desert. There's a headwind, and people soon will stop going to Europe because to go to Europe to work, Europeans are leaving Europe for work. Scientific research is concentrated now in China already, all right? And if you look at numbers properly, China is already the largest economy. It's not the U.S., all right? So the exchange rate is way artificially low, and if you look in terms of energy consumed and all of that, China is already, and China has more growth because it got more people to bring up to middle class, and India as well. So the center of gravity is going to be more in the east. So Turkey and Iran, but particularly Turkey. Turkey has been growing. People talk about problems. So Turkey is, for example, another example of where the future is. Much more than going to France or somewhere else. So this is why we can capitalize on that.
Well, we're so glad to have you here.
Well, thank you.
We look forward to interacting with you in many different venues.
I hope I can help not take your time and get all these nice lunches.
Well, to the contrary, I mean, you're already helping. You're already working with our faculty and
we'll see.
And soon visiting our
and
students.
I'd like to teach a class eventually. Listening. But I typically get bored getting into details.
Well, maybe you can collaborate with someone.
Yeah, maybe. But
you can use your dumbbell analogy.
Barbell, yeah. I do my MOOCs on the web, and they last about 8 minutes, themes and probability.
Yeah. Well, 8 minutes is a good chunk of time for someone to be able to process, digest, etc. before moving on. I mean,
you strip it down
evidence for that.
The most understandable thing.
Yeah.
I have a much more Russian approach to math than the French one.
Okay.
The French.
I honestly don't know what that means.
The French try to take things to the highest level of abstraction.
Okay.
Whereas the Russians try to take something to its maximal simplicity, but not beyond.
Got it. Well, Nassim, it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks. Honored to be in Beirut on AUB.
Thank you.